Okay, this is week 3 for Web 290. We're going to be going over control structures this week. For a practice lab, you are going to be lab than you will for the homework. But the practice labs really get you started with using MySQL and getting a username created in PHPMyAdmin using MySQL and your first database in MySQL, and creating a simple message board in PHP. These two documents here will help you with expression controls and handling dates, things of that nature, and then also the homework control structures, which we'll go over in just a second. But first of all, let's go over the creating a guest book PHP site. First thing you have to do is we're going to configure what's called a Config Dot Php file and place it in the root of your site, wherever that's at on your computer. Now, for the sake of example for this class, I have kept a folder on my htdocs called Web290. So Web290 is actually the root of my site for this class, and you could call yours whatever it might be. It might be labs, it might be homework, whatever it is that you've called it on your local host. But you need a config.php file at the root of that site. And this config.php file is going to be used and pointed to do a number of things throughout your site, like connect to your database, create tables, write to tables, delete rows and records, things of that nature. I have put here a config.php file placeholder. When you click on this link, it should download a zip file. Config.php file should then be placed accordingly on your htdocs area, wherever the root of your site is. The way I make mine up is basically, here's the root of the site. For labs, I have all my labs in a labs folder, and then the recording weeks in there. And for this week in the labs folder, for week 3, we've got edit, update, index, and contact 4 PHP files, which you'll need to download those files from the source area here for week 3. So again, download config.php file, put it in the root of your site, and then also download week 3 lab files and put it in, I suggest putting it in a week 3 folder of your lab directory. So again, this is my home directory, all of my folders. This is the template I gave you guys, I believe in the lessons tab. There is a lessons course documents zip file. I believe it's where I should have in that. Make sure it's in there for you. And I think everybody already has the website already uploaded, your default website. Here's the web290.zip, which is basically structure-wise as I have it here. So again, config.php file, download that. Also download the week 3 lab. The week 3 lab information, for this to work correctly on your computer as it does on mine, is whatever you name the folder where your labs are. This is the root of the site. Web290 is mine. And then labs. And then I've got week 3. And you'll see why that's important in just a second. Okay, so I've got two folders deep past the root, labs and then week 3. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right into XAMPP. When you log into XAMPP or access XAMPP for the first time, as you did in week 1, this is the home folder for XAMPP. You scroll down to the PHPMyAdmin section, And in this section is where you have the ability to add tables or add databases, users to manage those databases, tables, table structure, so on and so forth. You can also, within PHPMyAdmin, upload databases from other sites or from other locations, which you'll learn that as the semester goes on. In fact, basically what I suggest to do when we get to that place to where you're uploading using your database, your local database on your external site, is just uploading that database from your local to your external site each week. And I will do an actual podcast on that next week. So for this week, if you do upload your lab from week 3 into your external site, you will not have your external site configured yet for this to work. So it'll only work on your local host for this week. I will be next week, week 4, doing a podcast on getting your external host to talk to MySQL as your local host does. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Here's your PHPMyAdmin page. First thing I want to do is click on Databases, and we're going to create a brand new database. I suggest creating a brand new database with your first initial last name. So there's mine, cconcle. You want the database type to be coalition, and then just click Create. So it says here, database cconcle has been created. The syntax to do this within MySQL, if you were doing this outside of PHPMyAdmin, would be create database and whatever the name of the database is. Next thing we've got to do is, once you've created a database, add a privileged user to that database. So click on Privileges, tab, Add User. In the username field, keep it where it says Use Text field. First initial last name again. For any host, make sure it says localhost. Password, first initial last name. Retype it again, first initial last name, just to keep it easy. Again, this is all for local host testing, so it does not have to be too secure. When we create next week, I'll show you how to create on the external site 00 web host what we're doing here on the local host. For your PHPMyAdmin, we will create a more secure password for that. Okay? So again, cconcle, cconcle, cconcle. So your first initial last name for username, first initial last name, your first initial last name for password, and also here in the retype, first initial last name. Database for user. This one right here, it says here, grant all privilege on database with cconcle. Grant all privileges on wildcard name, or create database of same name and grant all privileges. This one here, you can actually, since we've already created a database, it should already be selected here, grant all privileges on database cconcle, which is fine. Keep it as that. Down here on global privileges, this means from here on out, if you were to create other database within MySQL, you want complete rights on everything, so just click check all. So real quick again, first initial last name on username, host is local, password is first initial last name. Database for user, keep it as is, grant all privileges to database, your first initial last name. Global privileges, check all. And then down here in the bottom right, there is a Go button. Click that. Now it says it's created my user, cconcle, at localhost. It granted all privileges to cconcle. It also granted all privileges on cconcle to everything on localhost. So now if I go back to the Databases tab, click on cconcle, go to Privileges, my name is now in there as being granted all privileges on this local host. To get back to the home page of PHPMyAdmin, let's click on the home page. Now, we're going to go and actually edit next the Config Dot Php file, which is in the root directory of the site. I'm going to right click on Config Dot Php, edit with Notepad++. Here is the lines needed for a Config Dot Php file. Connection parameters are dbhost, dbname, username, password, dbcon, connection string, MySQL connect, and MySQL select database. So let's start at the top. dbhost for localhost is going to be localhost. Next week when I do the podcast for external, we will actually put in the localhost, the external host directory information. dbname is going to be your first initial last name. Username, first initial last name. Password, first initial last name. Everything else stays the same. What this is going to do here is it uses a command called MySQL connect, which connects the database, username, and password that you've typed in here with these variables above, lines 3 through 6. Connection string does a MySQL select database of the database name. Then connect connects to that database. And then 12 selects a database. So we'll go and do a save all there. Next, I want to go into the actual folder or files for week 3 lab, and there's 4 of them. If you see a DS store, that's just a file added extra when I zip the files together. So anytime you see an extra file in there, don't worry about that. Okay, so we've got contact, index, edit, and update. Let's go ahead and look at these real quick. I've already got a few of them in here, looks like, opened up. Okay, let's start with the index page. We've already got the config done, saved to the root. Now let's look at the index page. The index page on this site basically just shows the contact title, my guest book, and that's it. So let me show you what I'm talking about before we actually get into the code part. Okay, labs. Okay, so this is what it should look like. If your database is not set up correctly, you will get errors down here at the bottom, meaning you didn't put in the right username password possibly in your config.php file, or you didn't correctly create it in PHPMyAdmin. So it just says MySQL guest book or my guest book, first name, last name, email, an add contact button, and then a data grid down here with first name, last name, email, and edit as the header files. So this does not need to be, actually none of these files for this week for the lab need to be manipulated, because I want you to focus on the structure of the page. The page is how things are loaded to understand this site better and how MySQL works with configuration files. So everything here from line 1 through lines 25 is a simple HTML form. Again, we've got the form name is people. Here's where we get into the action scripts using forms. Every form has an action. What this is doing is saying it's going to call to an action on the page contact.php, which we'll look at in just a second. The method is post. First name is an input text type, text box. This is real important too. The name of the text box. First one is F name, second one is L name, third one is email, and then finally a submit button. Then you've got at the bottom of that form an include statement or some PHP code here that I'm highlighting here. Is the latter part of that page that currently right now on my page you don't see anything showing up but it did run. That file did run. So let's look at this real quick. Okay, in PHP, this first line, 27, the include statement, the first time we've used it here in this semester. This actually allows, PHP actually allows you to include files within a file with just this one line. So we are including that config.php file in the root of your directory for the class. Mine's Web290. So it's actually including this file with simple path directory, relative path directory using HTML pathing, dot dot, meaning two directories back, dot config.php, which is in the root of Web290, right here. So dot dot just brings me back two folders, config.php. So it's loading that config.php. Then after it loads that config.php file, it checks to see that a table is available. In this case, the table's name is people. If I go back to my local host now and click on cconcal database in phpMyAdmin, you'll notice people table has been added. You say, how was that added? It was added within the code that we'll look at in just a second. So the script actually added in the cconcal database that was just created a table called people. And this is how it was done. On this line here, it checks to see the select all statement from people, limit 0, 1, meaning what this is going to do is kick back a positive number. This positive number fires the table exists. If it doesn't exist, it's going to go to this else path. Something else is wrong. And what it's going to do next is on lines 35 through 42 is create the table people with some fields, one people ID, people F name, people L name, people email, and the primary key is ID. I won't get into details on syntax yet, but this is a basic syntax for creating a table within MySQL. There are a lot of free resources on W3C Schools website. I have resources also on the root of our page for lessons. If we go there real quick, in fact, I think I have it in the textbooks tab that I put in here this week, which gives you examples of MySQL database in W3 Schools. W3 Schools is an excellent resource for MySQL database I suggest looking into, reading on. This link also is important to this next one, text pattern. But this is a very good beginner's examples on PHP MySQL. We could spend a whole semester just on MySQL, but we don't have time. So again, just try to overview with MySQL to get you started with PHP. So getting back to the document, we have a variable called peoples that has a MySQL query in here that creates the table with all the fields, and what this is doing here is creating a table called people with a field people ID. It's an integer with 11 characters allowed in that. Next is not, it can't be null, and it's auto incremented. Next is fname, a varchar, kind of like the string, allows 32 characters. It cannot be null either. Next one's lname, people lname, 32 characters. It's a string as well, cannot be null. And then lastly, email, a string of 32 characters, cannot be null. And then finally, primary key people ID. It's actually doing the deed here and creating the people's table along with the fields in the table. If there was an error, it would kick it out here onto your screen, which it didn't because I don't have an error on my page. Then finally queries the table again, selecting all from people, Now it kicks back the result into that query and then closes the query. Now here's where it's actually going in and going to be doing some what's called table looping and fetching. What this is doing is actually a simple HTML table embedded in echo commands. You'll notice if you embed HTML code in echo commands, it has to begin and end with quotes. Again, this is a not real complex table code. Very easy table code. But what it's doing here on the first part, these first 5 echo statements, is just the beginning of the table. In fact, it's actually this portion of the table right here that you're actually viewing. First name, last name, email, edit, and that's it. That's what's actually being built in the first 5 lines of the table creation, 51 through 55, lines 51 through 55. Then, the second row, if it had data, which this one doesn't, it just created the table, has no data, keeps getting the next row until there's no more data to get. So an example is this. We have a people table here in PHPMyAdmin. And going back to that beginning again, I click on Home, Database. You have a browser, but notice it's grayed out, meaning there's no data in this table. There's only table structure. That's all I have, this table structure here. If I click on this one, I actually see the structure, which the code created. People ID, auto increment, people F name, all name, and email. But there is no data. It shows down here no data in the table whatsoever. But if there was data, it's going to loop row by row and add those rows using in SQL called a MySQL fetch array of result, which was a SQL statement up here of select all. Select all in SQL means just that. It selects all records within that table. In this case, it's selecting all records from people, populating them in this MySQL query, and in a variable called result. You'll notice result is on line 47 is where it's initialized, and it's used here on line 51 to populate an array in MySQL. In the loop statement, it's going to echo out into row by row the people name, people F name, people L name, people email, and then finally the editing of the ID. And keeps looping that and looping that. One of the differences on this is going to be column 1, column 2, 3, 4. And then finally, on the last echo here, it's going to have a hyperlink back to the edit.php page that we'll look at in just a second, referencing back the ID of the record, which will allow the user to edit that record. So let me just quickly go back to the site here. I'm going to go ahead and add in real quick a user into this My Guest book. So there's my first name, last name, email, has an edit link. When I hover over the edit link, I don't know if you can notice on the bottom left of my monitor here, it has in there on the URL week 3 edit.php ID equals 1. Remember last week we did a send to a page by reference. That's what this is doing. It's going to the edit page, bringing to the edit page the one record, number 1 record, which if we now look in the local host, the PHPMyAdmin, we should have the ability now to browse into this cconcle or into your first initial last name. Look at the browse is now available. If I click on that, there is the table, the record that was created. People ID 1, my first name, my last name, and my email. So let's go back here. I'm going to click on the edit link. It'll then take me to the edit page, edit.php, bring in the variable 1. I'm going to edit this a little bit. I'm going to change Gmail to AOL.com. Submit. Now it goes to update.php and then goes back to the index with that updated email. I know it's a lot of information, and again, that's why I gave you all the code this week, so you could more understand the logic of what's happening versus trying to create this from scratch. So now that when I come back to this week 3 page, it will now give me the first record, or the only record actually in this database, which is the one I just added. So now let's go over the rest of the code here, the rest of the files here. We've already went over the config.php file. I had you create that initially, which again is your database connectivity file. Database name, username, password. This config.php file can be used in every single PHP file that connects itself to a database. Okay? Next, once they hit the submit button, once users click the add contact button, it's going to do a post command to, remember, contact.php. And it's going to bring over some variables, fname, lname, email. So let's go there to the contact.php page. You'll notice in the contact.php page, really short and sweet file. All this file is actually doing is, again, including the config.php file to connect to the database. Then it's doing an update string to SQL. Update, BB is the variable. Here is just a simple SQL string to insert into people a new record of people fname, people lname, people email. Values is going to be a post from the index.php page of fname, which is going to be it needs to be in the exact order for insert in SQL needs to be exact order. So we got fname was first here, so the values of first should be fname, and it is. This is the exact syntax, bringing in a field from a post. You'll notice it has a single quote on both ends. The reason it has a single quote on both ends is in SQL, this people fname is a string, and so it has to have quotes, so it knows it's a string. The second level is double quotes here. This is actually a PHP thing. Dot operator on both sides, and then the actual variable, post fname, bringing it in from the post within the index page. So it brings in fname, lname, and email from the post. The one field you'll notice that's not in this update is the ID field. The reason for that is the ID field is actually an auto increment field and does not need to be called on the update command, since it is an auto increment or insert command. So you'll notice here the structure of the database that was created. This is an auto increment field. Auto increment fields, when you insert a new record into a table that has auto increment, the auto increment field does not need to be explicitly called. It knows it by default, and it's going to increment this by 1 each time. Okay? Another MySQL query that calls in the update, which is actually an insert command. If something happened incorrectly, like say the config file is incorrect or something, or the syntax was wrong on the insert statement, it would give an error. This next line, line 9, the header location index. All this is going to do is redirect back to index. So when it goes back to the index page, let me add another example here. We'll add in a new record. Click add contact, and it hit the contact.php, inserted that new record. We can actually verify that here by clicking on the Browse button. There's the new record, Ted Smith, and notice the auto increment was automatically added. One was added to the people ID. And then it goes back to the index. Next, if they wanted to edit that new record, they click on the edit link, and remember the edit link is found at the bottom of the index.php page where it adds in the record, or adds in the people ID field at the end of every row, which is the field record for that record. So we have 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth as record IDs. So if I click on this field here, it's going to go to the edit.php page, record 2, and pull in that information into this page. So let's go there. And then again on this one, it includes a config file. It gets the ID from the information that was just clicked. So it's underscore get. It's not a post. It's a get. And remember, we used this last week. Get's actually used when you reference a link to another page. And in this case, when you hover over the mouse here, it's referencing, in this case, ID equals 2. ID equals 2. And you'll notice here in the code, it's pulling in the ID, which in this case is 2. Then it's selecting all from people, where people ID is ID. It's going to be 2. Plugs that into a variable called result. Does a myFetch array into a variable called num. So all the columns in people that equal ID is going to be plugged in to num. Then this is just a simple update. Here, it's going to update the page by being called update.php in a second, but it plugs all the data from that record into this field, into this form. So it's actually being plugged into the form, Ted Smith and tsmith@aol.com. It's being plugged in as such with a simple HTML form. But you'll notice in the HTML form I've actually embedded, which can be done as well, an echo statement. Echo statements be embedded from this num array. So I'm doing a num people f name, num people l name, and num people email. All right. Once they make a change on this page, and I'll do Teddy, and they hit submit, it's going to go to an update.php page, wait for a second, and then redirect back to the index with the changed information. So let's see how that works. Now remember, this is a post on this form. It's going to update.php. We go to update.php. In the update.php, again including the config file, bringing in the post, ID, fname, lname, and email, because remember those were all brought over from the edit form. People ID, people fname, people lname, people email. And it's doing a simple SQL update. Update people set, people fname equals fname, right here. People lname equals lname in quotes. People email equals email in single quotes. Where people ID equals ID. So all these variables are brought in from the post, updated in the SQL command, and then this last line, or next last, and then single quotes, refresh, colon, 4, tells it it's going to be set there for 4 seconds, semicolon, URL is index.php. So this is going to sit there for 4 seconds. While it's sitting there for 4 seconds, it's going to kick out an update on the screen, or string on the screen says update complete, please wait. So again, to reiterate that, I'll put this back to Teddy, or Ted, submit, update please wait 4 seconds. It'll then redirect back to the index page, reload the database into the data grid, and show up the correct data now that was just edited. So, starting at the beginning, Config Dot Php file. Remember we edited that with the information of first initial last name that we created in phpMyAdmin. Then, index.php. We went over this page, which basically loads the table and any default records. Initially, since there will not be a table that exists called people, it's going to create it. Create the table initially. Once you add a record and hit the add button, the add contact button, then it's going to take it from that to the contact PHP page, which is going to take and insert that new record into people. If they go and edit the page or edit the new addition to the message board, that is going to bring it to the edit.php page, which loads that unique record into the table. They make whatever changes they want to make. When they hit submit there, it's going to go to an update.php page. The update.php page will then take that data using a post that's brought over from edit and update the people table using the data brought in from edit. It'll then sit there for 4 seconds and redirect to index.php, but while it's waiting, it's going to display on the screen with an echo statement, update complete, please wait. Okay, so that concludes lab 3, or week 3 lab. Let's go ahead and close out of these open files. The homework lab is actually, like I said at the first of the podcast, a lot easier than the lab. But I wanted to start with week 2 on at least how to get started with your phpMyAdmin to create a table, create a user, see how that talks to PHP using the include statement, using the edit statements, update statement, insert statement within SQL, so you get a look and feel for how SQL works and interacts with PHP, which, by the way, MySQL and SQL both are the most popular databases used for PHP websites. So now let's go to the actual homework, which if you read all of the homework links, as far as the data links I have here in the lessons for week 3, you got control structures, or the control functions here, has some stuff on handling dates. Then the homework, it does have a PHP control structures information. Go over that and read that. There is an exercise in there that has you loop through a flow control to kick out numbers in a loop. Here's a data files for the lab. When you're finished with the lab, we'll look at that in just a second, show what it looks like. I'll scroll down to the actual homework on this page. Okay, it's working through loops. It's beginner, PHP beginner. Open it says open this file here in your editor. That's the file that you want to download right here. Okay, you download that file right there. And then it says under the while header, use a while loop to output all even numbers that are less than or equal to 100. Under the for header, use a for loop to output all odd numbers that are less than or equal to 100. In both loops, skip all numbers that are divisible by 3. Be careful not to get caught in an infinite loop. So again, this one is we're doing the exercise working with loops. Once you're finished with it, the working example is here. Here's the while loop, starting with number 2. going through 100. For loop, starting with 1, going through 99. So let's look at the code on this. So I'm going to go into my projects, week 3, it was one file. So, and this is my navigation I use for my site, so we can disregard that. So simple HTML beginning, title loops, we have a while statement and a header information just to say what's happening here. But here's the meat of what's happening here. Here's the while statement, here is the for statement. So we have to start in the while because the logic for while is while a variable is something, it's going to loop. So in this case, it's while a is less than or equal to 100, it's going to echo out the value of a plus 2. All right, this plus equals just an increment. Plus equals an increment mathematical variable or equation within PHP. So again, first line here in PHP is a equals 2. Remember, since it's a variable, or number does not have to have quotes, single quotes, or double quotes around it. While a, which this first loop is going to be 2, is less than or equal to 100, this first loop is going to put in there in a list form using this list HTML code whatever's in there. Initially it's going to be 2, then to this line 2 is going to become 4. Go back the second time now. This is going to be 4. It's going to kick out 4 on the second loop, and then 4 is going to become, or A is going to become 6, so on and so forth. So that's why you have in your loop example 2, 4, 6, all the way through 100. I'm sorry, yeah, all the way through 100. The last loop, A, will actually be 100. Because notice on the while statement, it's while A is less than or equal to 100. The next one's the for loop. It's a little different. The for loop, we begin with 1. While that variable A is less than or equal to 100, which is the same as here, it's going to increment it by 2. Okay? So the beginning variable, or the difference between this one and this one, is what number we're starting out at actually. But I want you to notice also the code structure for this is also a little bit different. For a for logic, you have to start out with something, whatever that something might be, a variable is, then the logic for the for statement, and then this is actually the increment statement. And in the while statement, you notice the increment statement's in the actual loop itself. In the for statement, it's actually in the argument for the for line. So we have A equals 1. Well, A is less than or equal to 100. A is going to be incremented by 2. So it's going to echo this out. The very last statement in here is going to be 99. Because when it gets to 99 and it increments it by 2, it's going to be 101, which will stop on the next loop. Okay? So again, for statement, we'll pretend we're all the way down to 99. It comes down here, kicks out 99, comes back. Now it actually does the increment, which is going to be 101, which will be above 100, will be, will not be less than or equal to 100, and so it will not kick out the 101. It's going to stop at 99. So on the for loop, 1, 3, all the way through 99. So that concludes the tutorial or the lesson for the homework assignment, which is week 3 homework assignment. Once you get through with week 3's homework assignment, you can then upload it as always to your external site. Give a URL to your external site here, your name here. Here's a copy of the solution as always. And I tell students in this class the reason I give you source control for each week is so you understand the concepts of that code and you're not worried about is it perfect or not. You can actually look at this code initially to see how it works and then code it on your own. If you have problems, go back to the original source code here to see what your problem is. Always use your references, always use your sources and your resources to go from on PHP in any web development language. The more you code, the more you are creative with your code, the better. I always tell students, change it up a little bit if you want to, do something a little bit different. That will also help you learn too. So for the lab, we did the guest book. Now if you do upload this guest book to your external site, it will not work because it's not been configured for your Config Dot Php file. Your database has not been configured in MySQL and PHPMyAdmin. But next week I will do a lab. In fact, if I have time this week, I'll do a lab on how to create your database within 00 web host to where you can begin playing around with your database on 00 web host as well. And where the great thing about it is once you get things working locally, even in your database, you just have to change the config.php file for your external site, and then you can actually upload your database file from XAMPP into your external site. In fact, let me show you real quick. Within PHPMyAdmin, it gives a real simple interface for saving your database or exporting your database for external use. And I'll just quickly show you this. I'm going to show you more this week or beginning next week how to do that. But in the export tab, you select your database. You simply leave everything as is at the top. Don't change anything. Name it. And then you click go. It prompts you to save it. And then it downloads it, if you're in Windows, to the your download folder, which is right here. So this would actually be everything included. This is a file actually that 00 web host uses to import that database within MySQL. So I'll show you more about that next week. But PHPMyAdmin, the great thing about 00 web host is it does have a PHPMyAdmin interface that we can actually import what we've exported here on our local host to 00 web host, and it'll import everything, database tables and all. We won't lose any data. So as we test things on the local, we can put them on the external. So that concludes week 3. If you do have any questions, you can definitely email me as always in Eagle online chat. And see you next week.